Well, we welcome you back to the To Be and Do podcast. This is Phil Amerson, and I'm having the joy, the fun of visiting with Reverend Mark Feldmeir, who's the lead pastor at St. Andrew's United Methodist Church in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. His book is Life After God: Finding Faith When You Can't Believe Anymore. And Mark and I have already shared one podcast, but on this podcast, I want to begin with a story, Mark, and let you riff off of that. I
Mm.
was recently on the campus of Indiana University. Uh, I don't know if you've heard out there in Colorado. I know you're in a different world, but we actually have a little challenge going on in some of our universities around the country. There, some people believe that we need to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we need to clean up
Mm.
curriculum and sort everything so that it fits in the right set of ideological lenses. So
Mhm.
I've been on campus talking this with the statues there, with, with the great old leaders, and Herman B. Wells was the grand old president and chancellor, deeply committed to academic freedom. And he was a member of First United Methodist Church, Bloomington, when I was pastor. And so I go and sit down and talk to Herman and record some of those. And my grandson said, "Grandpa, why are you talking to a statue?" And my response was, "He seems to be the only one listening these days."
Mm. Yeah.
But what I discovered was people would come by and I would begin to speak with them. And the question that elicited the most fascinating set of responses was when I would say to them pretty quickly, "What brings you joy?"
Mm. Mm.
I didn't start with my rave about academic freedom or that they're spending all the money on a football team. By the way, the national championship football team, I hope. Uh, but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but and not on the academy. But the better introductory question is, what brings you joy? So,
Mm.
Mark Feldmeir, what brings you
Yeah.
joy?
Well, I have to distinguish when I answer that question. I distinguish between happiness and joy, and I think there's a
Yeah.
fundamental difference between the two. And happiness, on the one hand, tends to be associated with circumstance, with sort of momentary success or glimpses of of happiness. And yet, there is another expression that I think is more gospel, another experience, and that's joy, which has a more enduring value and is able to transcend circumstance, whether it's personal or the mess at the university, or or with our current political climate. And I think what typically what almost invariably, I should say, what gives me joy is when I'm able to connect my own sense of calling and vocation or purpose in the world with the need in the world. And I was thinking about a story years ago at my previous church. When I was leading a church in San Diego, I took a group of young people to Los Angeles for a week-long mission trip. And we were supposed to go paint a house for an elderly couple. It was all part of we were just assigned a job. And so we had about a dozen of us. Anyway, we were in South Central, and nothing really went particularly well. Nobody was especially happy the whole week. We slept on a gym floor. There were mice everywhere. I think there was an outbreak of lice in the group. One really bad night of food poisoning from some bad spaghetti sauce, and it was just one thing after another. And then we were sent to the wrong house to paint, and that didn't really go over well with the homeowner. Um, but we got through it. We survived, and we actually served, and it was, at the end of the day, it was meaningful. We were driving home, and And I looked at one of these kids and I said, are you tired? And he said, yeah, I'm exhausted, but he said, it's a good tired. And I thought, that's joy, as odd as it sounds. To have something good to work for and toward in the world that leaves us tired but not depleted. And in a world right now where most of us are depleted of energy and attention and patience and grace, to have something to give ourselves toward in service, that's it always gives me joy, and it beats it beats happiness by a lot.
Yes, it does. Tired but not depleted.
Yeah,
Do you find
yeah,
yourself
and
there often?
every day I feel sort of that tug between that joy on the one hand that can't be depleted and just the utter exhaustion. And I was just telling somebody the other day actually that there was a time, especially in the middle of the pandemic, and as we started pulling out of the pandemic and reopening, that I would I would come to church and I would have a mailbox full of notes that were mostly negative and not supportive. Why are we wearing masks? Why do we close down? Why are you preaching about racism? And Man, it was so depleting, and there wasn't a lot of joy or happiness and all that. But we're in a new space now, and I come to work most days, and I the notes that I get are positive and supportive, and um, you know, so those come and go, but if I have something to ground me in this understanding that I'm serving, that I'm connected to a purpose bigger than myself, that's what keeps me from running out of gas. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is Wes Jackson, the agriculturalist, good friend of Wendell Berry's. He
Mm,
started something called the Land Institute,
yeah.
and I sort of live by these notions. He says, if your life's work can be accomplished in your lifetime, then you're not thinking big enough.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Um,
And that helps me
and
calibrate what gives me joy.
and part of that is knowing that even when our work is done and we're no longer here, that the work that we do is carried on by somebody else. That's the
Yeah,
hope. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, that gives us some degree of satisfaction and fulfillment. Um, yeah.
Okay, so I'm I want to talk about, is there joy in baseball? I mean, I see this image over your shoulder, and I can't tell if that's it's surely not San Diego Padres, and it's not the Pirates. Is there another team that might have those approximate colors?
Yeah, you got it right. It's the Pirates, and that it's a bobblehead of Roberto Clemente, who um
Wow.
who uh who died with exactly 3,000 hits. And I've always been inspired by his story. A, because I'm a huge Dodger fan, and I'm sorry to say, I know many people will disparage me for that, but I will say, Roberto Clemente was originally drafted by the Dodgers. They lost him in what's called the Rule 5 draft. They didn't protect him. He was taken by the Pirates, became a future Hall of Famer, and 3,000 hits. But the story, which I, I think is mostly true, was that he showed up on basically the last day of the last game of the season, and wasn't going to play and was going to wait it out to get his 3,000th hit and next year because it was going to help ticket sales and all this stuff. And the he was convinced by one of the commentators up in the booth to suit up and play, and so he did, and he got a double and finished his career with 3,000 hits. And then just weeks later was tragically
Yeah,
killed in a plane crash while he's
game crash.
delivering earthquake aid to Nicaragua, I think, or whatever it was. But um, yeah, so I hold that as that bobblehead as just a reminder to show up and suit
Mm.
up and shut up and do the work,
There you
even when you
go.
don't feel like it, you know.
Well, the other thing that I kind of suspected was you would talk about the best band in the world ever.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence of U2 fandom here in my office, but I you'll find U2 songs even last week or creeping into my preaching, and I try to do it in ways that aren't gimmicky, but to lift up some lyrics or some imagery in their songs, which are deeply poetic, I think, and powerfully spiritual. So a good way to connect with people.
So, what are your reading habits, Mark? You read so widely, it appears, and
Mhm.
quote generously from various venues. Tell me what your habits are.
Well, I will honestly say there was a time where my goal was to read a book a week, and I did that actually up until just after COVID when I got back from sort of the shutdown and things were all about reopening. But I still read anywhere from 25 to 35 books a year. And I try to read some theology right now. I try to read anything that's new and in process or open relational theological thought. I read a little bit of poetry, but I try to read books like right now I'm reading Scott Galloway's book, Notes to a Young Man, I think is what it's
Yeah,
called.
that's a
Uh,
fine book. Yeah, yeah,
and it's a great book, and it's helping. In fact, I've used it in a couple of pastoral care encounters with folks here at St. Andrew, um, acknowledging how far we've left behind our young men and boys in our culture, and the gaps that they're experiencing in the modern world, and the needs that we're seeing. And of course, I've got my youngest is 22, and so as I'm listening to this or reading this book, I'm listening to his own stories and Matt's own life, my son, and where he's headed. Um, so I'm trying to read 30 to 45 minutes a day. Sometimes is all I've got. But if that's all I've got, that's what I'll do. And I've got a stack of 50 plus books right now. So uh, but
that
but reading, uh, and I learned this early on from a mentor that I had, Chuck Simmons, back in the Calpac conference, who's
yeah.
died 5 or 6 years ago now. But Chuck taught me that to be a good preacher, you have to be a good reader. And Chuck would feed me all kinds of like Annie Dillard and books of poetry, and I learned a lot from him about the power of reading, power of
Yeah.
words. So
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, especially on a podcast that's going to be public. But one of the things I shared with you that I find is true, reading shows in the language that's used in preaching.
mm,
And
absolutely.
it's at a subterranean level perhaps, but there have been some sermons you've preached and I look at my spouse and say, well, that was iambic pentameter for the last two
Uh-huh.
paragraphs.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. And I tend to I because I write my sermons and I write with the ear in mind, I pay attention to the location and the words, the rhythms of sentences, the shape of paragraphs, knowing that's some poetry, uh, whether it feels where it's intentional poetry or just a sort of poetic verse to it. I think people, and actually, I just heard a couple weeks ago somebody said that was great poetic work you did, and
Yeah, yeah,
I take great pride in that. And that
great.
only comes from reading
Yeah.
and being exposed to great writers.
So, in closing, you may have already done this. We'll test. Um, I sometimes ask my guests if there is an image, a book, a photograph, an object that they keep nearby or often think of that helps them helps them know where they are on the journey or what the journey's all about. Do you have
Mhm.
something like that in your office or in your home or in your mind that
Yeah.
assists you?
I have a little it's actually a little, well, 2 things. One, it's a little, uh, a cup, a thing to put my hot cup on my desk, and it's a labyrinth, and I see it every day. It's there to remind me, that there in some ways, it's yeah, it's not about the end point, but 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 this journey is its own sort of process of becoming and evolving, of birthing, along the way. So that's one. The other is a tile that I have on my desk over here, from the Camino, which I've walked portions of the Camino 3 times now. And if anybody's familiar with the Camino, the Camino de Santiago, that is, you're guided along the journey with a simple, either a shell or a yellow arrow that points the direction. And you'll see these tiles along the Camino every 3 kilometers, 2 or 3 kilometers, and at every turn to show you where to go. And I think it's a wonderful, for me, a wonderful reminder, of you don't have to know the whole way. You just have to know the next turn and pay attention to the signs,
Right.
and you can make the whole trip that way. So
That's terrific. Well, thank you, Mark Feldmeir, pastor of St. Andrew United Methodist Church in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Uh, hmm. Let's take this journey together again one of these days, and maybe in 6 months or so, I'll dial you up again and see if we can't catch up. God
I'd be
bless
great.
Phil Amerson for the belonging exchange. Take care, Mark.
Thanks.